So, hello and welcome to today's session. So, this time we're gonna look again at Sarah's environment, but this time we will look at static lighting for the daylight setting. So, before we get things started, just as always, like everything that I'm going to say, it's my opinion, it's my experience. So yeah, I could be wrong, or you could have like different opinions or different solutions or ways of doing your stuff. That's totally fine. So yeah, like nothing that I'm about to say is like the ultimate way of doing things. So yeah, again, there are so many ways to roam, and yeah, sometimes it's really just about like what gets the job done. Um, so yeah, let's jump directly into it because yeah, I'll try to make all the upcoming videos like hopefully less than an hour. So let's see how that turns out. So I got this map here, which is the daylight setting, and okay. Map check looks good. Last time I opened the map I got some compilation errors because some of the materials did not have some flags set. We can go through that if it pops up again, and I can explain why that happens, but so far everything looks good. So yeah, uh, that's the daylight scene from Sarah. In general, pretty much a similar setup to what we saw in the night setting. So the first thing that I want to do this time around is I basically want to do a quick control pass. Let's call it that. Control pass. What I mean by that is first I want to check if everything is set up correctly. And if you remember last time we worked on that scene, if we look at the base color, we have this stuff here. Those very strong saturated colors and way too much contrast. And I actually want to fix that because this time we're gonna work with Lightmass. And what Lightmass does is it calculates global illumination and bounce light and bakes it into light maps. So what happens is during that process it picks up the diffuse colors of the objects and uses those colors to bounce around. And excuse me. And if you have some super, yeah, I wouldn't say like necessarily wrong values, but if you have too strong values, it can also generate a quite unnatural bounce. So what I quickly want to show before we start checking if all the technical aspects of the scene are working as intended, what I want to do quickly is I want to fix all those textures. So what I'm about to show is a kind of crude way of fixing it. So I would not necessarily recommend this way because I think you should actually fix the source files. However, I don't have any access to that stuff and I also don't want to export things into Photoshop and so on. So I'm going to show you a quick way of how you can do it a little bit differently. So if we just look at this object here, our little sci-fi sphere bubble thingy, those are the textures. And if I open it up in the texture editor, I get this. And the cool thing in Unreal is that if you scroll down here, under adjustments, we actually can tweak the textures to a certain extent. Like it's by no means as precise or accurate as Photoshop, but it can help us very quickly to go towards a more balanced result if we just want to adjust these values quickly. So the last time, I think I said it, there's two problems. One problem is stuff being oversaturated, and the other problem is that some of the stuff actually has too much contrast. So what I will do here, let's try to get the thing in the frame as well. Actually, we don't need so much of this image here. The values are more important. So let's do something like this. Um, so we have this value here, saturation. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lower that to 0.9, and you can see it did something. Normally those take a little while until they actually update in the viewport. So that's one thing. And then there is also another setting, which is the brightness curve. And I hope I remember correctly, if you lower that value, it becomes brighter. Yeah. So basically, if I would use 0.2, for example, you can see it kind of like, it also has an effect on the colors, which is the reason why I would not suggest using this stuff like all the time or with very, very strong adjustments. So I would try to keep it fairly subtle. So let's try 0.6. This looks a lot more like one of the base colors I would actually use. So let's keep it at that. Maybe we need to tweak it later on as well. Just gonna save that. And now what we're gonna do is we basically gonna go through all the textures here in that scene, um, and we try to fix them slightly. I also noticed several other issues. I will quickly mention them. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is just like me giving some general tips, because what I noticed when I looked at some of the things here in that scene and how they are built, they are honestly built in a very, very inefficient way. So if we just look at the shaders here of the house, so this is the house. We're using a lot version right now. I believe we are doing that because we get better unwrap on that than the other version, so it kind of like works better for Lightmass. However, it's still not good, and I will follow up on that a bit later. However, if we just open the material quickly for the house, and we go and search for the base color, and we open it up, you can see this thing here. And the reason this texture looks like this, and it's a 4K texture, and this is actually not good, not at all, because the problem is this is not a good usage of UV space, and what you can see here is it seems like every wooden plank that we can kind of yeah, now we can see it that well because it's the lot, but basically every wooden plank is a separate mesh in the other version. And that causes many, many issues because like normally what I would do is I would take this whole face of the house and unwrap it in one piece. And then I would take the side of the house in one piece and the back and that way. So the problem with this approach is that this is a very bad UV space usage, and it has some very bad influence on the light map as well. So just on a side note, like this is not really good to work with. So next time uh, you build an asset like that, like really make sure that you unwrap these as like one face basically, as a continuous shell. So, however, we're adjusting the colors now. So I'm starting with the same base setting. I'm just going to reduce the saturation to 0.9. Now you can see it like takes a while to update. There it is. And I'm going to adjust the brightness curve to 0.6 as well. Okay. That looks fairly alright. Gonna save that. Close that stuff down. What's next? So next one, we take the barrel. We can also see that the barrel, I think I mentioned it last time, the barrel is very, very, very dark. So what we're gonna do is this is the barrel texture here. we just go in here, go saturation 0.9, brightness curve 0.6, and now we can actually see, hey, wait a second, that thing actually has color. So it was so dark that we couldn't even see that it actually was kind of like a blue barrel. Um, I will keep it at this value, but maybe it would make sense to make it even a bit brighter. But we'll see. Close that one. By the way, I'm keeping that window open so it constantly opens up the textures in this new window, which makes it just nicer for me. In case you were wondering, like, why is he having that stuff open all the time? So the next thing that we need to look at are the trees. Okay, so here's our albedo. Gonna open that up as well. Whoops. Where is it? Too many windows. Okay, so here is the albedo. I'm gonna deactivate the alpha so we can just better see the texture. Gonna move this like this. And now we go down again. We go saturation 0.9. And we go brightness curve 0.6. So, this already looks a lot brighter. And you might remember from the last session, so this is something that we really need to do to balance these values out, because this also has an influence on the fog stuff I was talking about last time. So to achieve that kind of flat look. Like the thing is, if your textures look very flat, and then you add the lighting on top, and then you add some post-processing on top, you will get the crunchiness, you will get all the contrast. The problem is, if you have all that contrast before getting the lighting and before getting the post, you basically lose all the room to work with your lighting and your post. So before we had PBR, textures mostly were authored in a very realistic way. And so you baked ambient occlusion into the diffuse textures, and you made them really look like the object should basically kind of look, because you had to fake so much of the lighting part. And the problem is, it's not necessary anymore, at least to a certain extent. And what I often encounter, even with like people that have been in the industry for many, many years, is it's difficult for them to let go that their diffuse textures basically don't look that great anymore, because like the greatness comes from everything getting together. Back in the days when there was no PBR, the diffuse textures, they looked a lot more representative of the actual result that you would get in the end. And like these days, they look super boring and flat. And yeah, it's hard for people to basically accept that their diffuse textures really don't look that great. And sometimes I see artists struggling because they think like, no, I need to add a little bit more punch to the texture or something like that. I'm like, please, no, don't add punch. We do it. The lighting guys will add the punch later on with some grading and some lighting effects and stuff like that. So this is the reason why we actually want the image to be flat per default, because then we can do all the magic. But if something is black because there's too much contrast, I can't get that information back. However, if it's just gray, I can always increase the contrast and make it look black. So that's kind of like a little bit the simplified theory behind this, so to speak. So we'll also take this little tree here. Bum, 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 bum. Looks like it's this texture. Yeah, and I mean we can already see when we like look at this texture here. I mean this is super saturated. This is really, it's a lot. But we'll fix it, no worries. So we go 0.9 and 0.6, and we'll see. what we get. Yeah, we can already see the difference here between those two trees. And again, you think this might look really shitty. That's okay. We're gonna add all the nice stuff with the lighting back in. So we go for the next tree. Bimp, bimp, bimp. And we open up that one. And same story here as well. So we just tweak those values. And I mean, like, you can really spend more time on tweaking these values. I'm just like doing a dirty thing right now fairly quickly. Um, I also think that if we look at this tree, we could actually maybe check the trunk as well, which is this one here. Yep. Let's just have a look here. I mean, the trunk is not too bad, but a little bit more flatness could definitely help us. And 0.6. That is actually too much. So we go for 0.8 maybe. And the thing is, like, you know, those are not like values that I'm reading off a chart. So this is purely based on experience, kind of. So I've done these things many times, and I kind of like know where my values should be for certain things. If you're not, if you don't have a couple of years experience, it might be harder for you. But in general, my rule of thumb is it's less of a problem if your textures are too bright than it is if they are too dark. So what that means is better make them slightly too bright because you can always fix it with some color grading and some post work. But if they are too dark, the values are just gone and you can't do anything to fix it. And we're also doing the mech, which is here. Uh, 0.9. Where is it? I don't really know why this takes so long sometimes, and it is like it's very intransparent. It's like sometimes saturation is almost instantly, and the brightness curve stuff takes longer, and now you could see that the saturation takes longer. I actually have no idea why it is like that, but it also doesn't matter so much. Okay, now there is only two things left that are kind of my main concern, and that is the grass and the landscape texture. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna check here for the grass mesh. Which one is the most placed one? This one. So that's the grass mesh. Okay, so this is our grass texture here. And let's see. So first I'm gonna try the same settings as before, and let's see where they take me. So a little bit of desaturation and the brightness curve. Okay, so if I look at the relationship between the grass and the trees, and if I look at the if I compare it to the ground material, I think this actually looks already fairly close to what I want. So I'm gonna keep this for now. And the last thing I'm gonna do is whoops, out of foliage mode, because otherwise you can't select stuff. Did I just paint this grass patch? Yeah, well. Um, so we open up the landscape material and okay, there's a couple of unused stuff in here. And that's the one that's hooked up. So let's have a look at this so we can make sure that the grass and the actual grass texture on the ground are fairly similar. Yeah, sweet. And there's also some dirt stuff. Let's have a quick look at this. I think it looks like, yeah, that's the one. Let's try 0.8 because I don't want to wash that one out too much. So, I think for what we're doing that is enough. I mean, there are several other components like these cables and some of these like tessellated dirt decals. Um, I'm I'm not gonna touch them right now. However, I want to make that earth darker as well. You never know. Could be, nope, could be good to do that. So, flower bed. Yeah, like if I just look at this texture, I mean you can see it here, make it bigger. Like this is really dark. This is extremely dark. So we just go in and we adjust that. I I think this is better. Yep. Let's let's keep it like that for now. Okay, so we fixed our values, most of them. There are a few exceptions, but again, it's fine for now. Uh, I quickly want to brighten up the bike as well. Sorry. Uh, this one. Yeah. Okay. So now we go back to lit. And now we can see it looks fairly flat. So one thing that we need to do, because I'm not on 4.15, so I don't have Filmic Tone Mapper set as default. Um, it's pretty cool because like I was someone pointed that out to me in the forum post. So my suggestions that I actually gave in the color grading part, um, for like some funny reasons, Epic actually were thinking ahead and they actually did something fairly similar. It's not yet there, but they what they basically did is they introduced proper HDR features with 4.15, and because HDR needs a couple of things more thoughtfully set up, let's say like this, um, Epic actually switched the default tone mapper to the Filmic one now, and they also these post-process options that I showed you the last time where it was only numbers and stuff like that. They actually implemented color wheels and kind of like fixed that stuff. So it's still not perfect. There is still room for improvement. However, it's a very, very good step in the right direction. So either okay, yeah. I just didn't pay attention for some reason. Okay, so there's a change. Sweet. So that's how it looks right now. Um, if you remember, we actually changed the sky as well. So wait a second. I need to turn off the post effects because I don't like the depth of field stuff. By the way, here the color temperature, you can see how it was set to something cooler. If I remove that tweak, you can see that we actually get quite some saturation back. So it doesn't really necessarily look desaturated when we look at this, and we get a lot more value to work with. So that's already good. Just quickly trying to check some of these values off and make sure that I basically have a clean base because as I already said the last time, I think it's super important to get a clean base and to set all that stuff up in a proper way and start from a clean state basically. Okay, so the Gaussian depth of fields does something weird to the screen corners. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not such a huge fan of the depth of field stuff. It can be very nice, but personally, I would think about this on a shot per shot base. So if you have a very specific shot where something in the foreground is sticking out and it is like tremendously improved by having that thing being slightly out of focus, then yeah, sure, go for it. But I normally don't enable depth of field stuff globally. But that's just a personal preference, so do as you please. Okay, so I cleaned the post volume. I will delete the sky. And what I will actually do, because I'm super lazy, I'm sorry, but that's how it is when you work all the time and stuff like that. You also become a little bit lazy and you think about where you can save work. So what I'm going to do is I'm just quickly open the other environment and I'll just copy and paste the sky over so I don't have to rebuild all that stuff again. Boop. There it is. Okay, so I actually like that. I actually think that is pretty cool to have it kind of like this. I know that the sky is an evening sky, so it might not be perfectly matching for what we want. However, um, we have some nice gradients and some like nice little definition that actually matches the shots that we had quite well. Okay, this is good. And so what I'm going to do is I will probably just increase the brightness a little bit. Yep, that feels kind of alright. And now, before we continue to clean up, I just want to have a quick look again at the daylight references. So you can see here the sky is kind of like it's super hard to tell what type of sky this is. Here it's obviously a little bit better, but you can see it's also kind of like it's not like 12 o'clock, like noon or something. It's definitely a little bit later in the day. There is always a slight hint of like red, orange, pink. Um, what's also a little bit tricky with these images is to see how the shadows behave. Because what you can see here is that there is a sun coming from the right, but it doesn't seem like this is a very strong sun. So there must be some sort of like thin layers of clouds kind of like occluding the sun, but not fully occluding it. So it's not like summer or a high contrast or anything like that. But there's the sun. I can see shadow here. So we will try to get there. Okay. Let's close this. So let's start with validating our lights. So we do have the directional light, which is set to movable. Okay. So yeah, I actually noticed this the last time I just quickly opened the scene. So this is something for me, it's like I don't fully understand this because this is the light build day, and it was specifically mentioned in my description by Sarah that this is the scene where she tried to build it and all the lights are set to stationary. So I actually don't know why the light is not set to stationary, it was set to movable. And yeah, I'm going to remove these fake lights now, just so they're not getting in my way. And I also make sure that the skylight obviously is also set to stationary. And now you can see what happens here. This is like distance field ambient occlusion, and now it's all gone because now we need to actually bake the lighting on the foliage to get the same information as we got from the mesh distance fields. So I'm also going to capture the scene. So now you can see it already got way darker because if we look again, this cube map is broken with all this black stuff in there, and there's also too much bounce coming. The sky is like way too bright, so it doesn't really match what we have here. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna go to base color view mode, and I'm gonna pick the lower hemisphere color, take a little bit of a darker spot here. So same as we did the last time, we're gonna tint the lower half of the skylight green, because that is, you can already see here that we get a little bit of preview green bounce here. I can see how this changes stuff. So we're just like making sure that all these things are like set up correctly. This also looks fine to me. Again, the sun direction, I think it's not a good sun direction, because the problem is that our main shots, they are from the front. From the front. This is the only back shot, but it's kind of like it's a separate special shot. And this one again is from the front. So what happens is all the shadows are facing away from us, and they're actually being occluded by our level geometry. And personally, I would say, like, this is an issue of lighting, but it's also something that is very close to composition. Because I think, again, personal opinion, it looks less interesting like this. So what I would actually like to do is, I'd like to take the sun and just fool around with it. Just want to see what happens. What do I kind of like or what not? I mean, stuff like having the sun in the back can always be kind of cool. As long as the sun is so low that you actually see it. I'm not yet entirely sure what I like most. I actually think that something like this looks fairly cool because it kind of like you know, it could really like shine nicely if we get like the bounce lighting in. Whoops. For the last setting, for the night, we had a sun rotation kind of like this. So this is also important because you can see what happens to the trees and all that stuff. We just need to see what we kind of like. So the thing is what we should probably do, and that is one of the benefits of baked lighting is maybe maybe this position, because I kind of like how the picture looks, like the image looks with that sun position, but I'm not too happy about the whole building here being in the shadows and the robot as well, which we can obviously fix again. But I I don't know yet. So what we could do is we can do a test bake and see, because the thing is, if we look at this here, the sun is hitting this ground here. So what could potentially happen is that it bounces back on the building and brightens the building. But we don't know that yet. That is just like me thinking about what could potentially happen. So we can take this shot now. I also like this. See the nice reflections we get on the roof. I actually quite like this, and if we would get some nice bounce lighting, this could actually look really, really good. So first thing is, let's just try it. So where are my world settings? So I'm gonna drag over my world settings as well because they're fairly important for Lightmass. Um, I'm gonna have a look at the lighting quality. So what, if I understood it correctly, you have the actual Lightmass settings in the world settings, and those settings that you're typing in there, those are basically the production settings, and everything that you choose here, which is lower than that, it basically lowers those settings by a certain like quality multiplier or something like that. So that's how I understood it, how it works, because it's a little bit hard to really find like proper documentation on that. But so these values here for the light mask quality, they are the production settings, and then if you bake on preview, it's just like taking these values divided by whatever, 5, for example. Um, okay, so we need to check here that we disable force no pre-computed lighting, because this is only for dynamic lighting. And now you can see in the top left, we get this pop-up. Lighting needs to be rebuilt. 1,931 unbuilt objects. That's fine. We want to have compressed light maps turned on. You can turn that off if you have really, really, really a lot of graphics memory, and if you have strong hardware and you're building like a architectural visualization demo or something like that. But for game projects and stuff like that, I would always leave that turned on because, yeah, it reduces the memory footprint. Use ambient occlusion, it depends. Um, I sometimes use it, especially since you can sample that ambient occlusion in the material, and you can do like, for example, if kind of like here, down here, if it bakes ambient occlusion, you could basically use that ambient occlusion mask and you could have dirt at the bottom of the building basically coming from that ambient occlusion mask in the material. I normally start without it, and then I just see where I end up. Excuse me. The environment color, that value does nothing. At least it does nothing if you have a skylight, because the skylight basically replaces that. This, the skylight is a light that comes from all directions of the sky and it casts on everything. That is the reason why these shadows are not black, because they get lit by the sky. So if you don't have a skylight, then it falls back to the environment color. So I'm just gonna reset this um, out of, yeah, keep things in order. Now, these top settings here, static lighting level scale, num indirect bounces, indirect lighting quality, and the smoothness. They are the absolute guts and meat of Lightmass. Those are the most important settings that you will ever need. Um, you have tooltips, so they explain quite good what's going on. So you can read here that 0 is direct lighting only, 1 is 1 bounce, and now the interesting information is bounce 1 takes the most time to calculate and contributes the most to visual quality, however followed by bounce 2. Successive bounces don't really affect build times but have a much lower visual impact. That last sentence is very, very, very tricky, because the thing is this. I did some tests with a kind of hallway mesh, basically, and it was only open on one side, and then it went on for 20 meters, and then there was just a wall cutting it off. And the default is 3 bounces. And it doesn't really get more expensive in terms of bake time if I put in 100 bounces. This has no effect on the baking time. However, but have a much lower visual impact as stated in the tooltip. That's wrong. Because the more bounces you have, the further the light travels. And you can see that if you have a hallway and you have only one light at the beginning of the hallway, depending on how many bounces you have, the light never reaches the end of the hallway. So if you have 20 bounces, it goes 3 meters into the hallway, and then it just becomes all dark. If you have 50 bounces, it goes even further, and if you have 100 bounces, you might be able to actually reach the total, the back of that thing. This is important to know because sometimes you might have scenes where it's very, very hard to get all the light come into something. So imagine you're building a tomb or something like that. And it's like this huge cave, and you only have a couple of holes in there, and you don't get enough light in there. And actually using then portals on those holes to focus light mass, to send more rays through those holes, and increasing the number of bounces actually has a huge visual impact of getting light down into your cave or tomb or whatever. So I think this is a very important value. Normally I start with around 20 bounces. That is just something that feels kind of right to me. The indirect lighting quality, that is kind of like a global multiplier of all the settings that you can find in Lightmass, or basically in the Lightmass INI. That is the file where all the settings are in that basically, in the Lightmass INI, it says for this mapping shoot 500,000 photons, and for this thing do that, and blah 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 blah. And all these things, they are combined into that value of indirect lighting quality. And if it's 1, then it's going to use those 500,000 photons or whatever. And if it's 2, then it's going to use 1,000,000 photons. So basically this multiplies up the whole calculation quality. However, since it becomes more accurate, you need to reduce the smoothing factor. Because if you have, let's say, if you have less rays shooting in a ray tracer because of a lower quality, you need a higher smooth value to smooth out the noise you would get from the ray tracing. However, if you send more rays and you get less noise, you need to smooth less, because otherwise you will smooth away the additional detail that you actually gained from it. So what I normally do is I start with indirect lighting quality 4, and I start with like 0.7 or something like that as the indirect lighting smoothness. Now, static lighting level scale. The tooltip is quite good for this, so it's fairly accurate, um, but it's sometimes hard to understand what it actually does. Personally, I never touch that value. I've seen many instances on the forum where people say like touch that value if you get like seams between modules and things like that. Honestly, I have always solved the seam problem with indirect lighting quality and smoothness. I never once used static lighting level scale. The only thing that did for me was introducing more issues than I had before. Because what happens is, it says here, one Unreal unit is 1 centimeter. And if you change that value, it basically changes the relationship, and thus the the calculations of Lightmass become more detailed, because it basically I don't know in which direction it works, but let's just say it like this. 1 centimeter is one Unreal unit, and if you change that scale, then 1 centimeter becomes two Unreal units, and then the calculations are twice as expensive basically for the same amount of surface, so to speak. And that can give higher fidelity, but I am not really a fan of using that. So my recommendation, don't touch that value. You can of course fool around with it. Some people really get like good results with this, but I think it's not really necessary. So, okay, so we have that set up, and I would say let's start a bake. And I'm gonna bake on preview now, because I actually have no idea how long this is gonna take. What is this? I think it's correct because I don't want the dusk stuff to be built. Yeah, that looks fine to me. So it's also important, like you can bake levels individually and then make them visible, which works quite well. But sometimes you might get a seam between objects if they are on these different sub-levels. But it's actually quite nice. So what I did, for example, in the past was, like, if we look at this landscape, this is not a big landscape. If imagine we have a landscape that has 10 times the size. What I sometimes do is I basically take this large of a part of the big landscape and I move it into a different level, and then I build my geometry on this part, and the rest is basically just like a vista. And then I can bake the two individually and then just enable them both, and you don't really see it, but I get a lot faster baking times because of that. So that was fairly quick. So let's see what we get. So that's good. MapCheck found some errors. Of course, MapCheck always finds errors. Now let's have a look at this. So we need to recompile shaders. That is very common because, how do I explain this fairly quickly? Let's try to get a material first. Okay, I think it's opening. It's a little bit slow right now since it's compiling shaders as well. So the thing is this, if you're using Lightmass, your shader automatically sets a flag. And if we scroll down in the shader, we have usage, and we have use with static lighting. So what happens is basically in Unreal there um, there is a limitation on how many textures you can use per material. That limitation comes actually from OpenGL and not from Direct3D. And it's a default behavior of the engine, and it's just to make sure that all your stuff always works on every platform. So OpenGL has a max amount of, I think, 16 or 17 texture samples it can like work with per material. And when you start using Lightmass, Lightmass also needs texture samples per material ID basically, because it needs a light map where the bounce lighting is saved in a texture, and it needs a shadow map as well. And what it's going to do is, if you set this flag used with static lighting, it will take away two texture samples of your 16 that you have per shader and reserve them for the light maps. You can see this down here. This says texture sample 2 of 16. And that is because we have a normal map and we have a diffuse map. The others are just color values. If I would set this flag to true now, then we would lose another two samples. Now you might ask, okay, so how can I make a complex landscape material that has more than 12 textures? I mean, you know, like sometimes one terrain layer has 3 textures. So if I have 3 layers, that's already 9 textures. So how does that work? And actually there's a workaround for that. However, as far as I'm aware, maybe that changed with like recent implementations for like new OpenGL stuff and like new rendering things. But um, as far as I know, it definitely works in Direct 3D. It's basically you put textures into a texture array, and then the samplers don't really count the same way anymore as they did before. I'm going to show that to you. If you have the texture sample here, you can see the sampler source is set from texture asset. And if you set shared wrap means that the texture can tile. If you clamp it, it can't tile anymore. And if you set all the texture samples inside a material to shared wrap, you can basically, I think in theory you can use 128 texture samples then, but it basically gets rid of that OpenGL limitation of you can only use 16 textures. And they just basically don't count into that calculation anymore. So sometimes when you start baking Lightmass, you get errors in your message log actually saying like, hey, you did not set those values accordingly and you need to. And then you might, if you have a complex material, you might run out of texture samples, and then you know you can use the array to actually bypass that problem. So this is a very, very helpful tip. So now that we got the lighting results here, first of all, let's just have a quick look what happens here. Okay. So our trees look the same as before. That means the trees are actually not baked. So the trees are probably manually set to movable, and then they react like a character or something like that, so they don't get baked at all. Here we have our house, and we can see we have quite a lot of green bounce on the house, so that seems to be working. But we can also see that there are quite some issues. And if we check the output log, we see house lot low, lightmap UVs are overlapping by 94.1%. That is basically the worst case possible, because like we can't do anything like that. Like if the light maps are overlapping by 94%, that's kind of like unusable. Same goes for the spruce. So apparently one tree, mainly the spruce, and that's this one, it actually looks like it didn't it wasn't set to movable before. So this is something that we can just double check. So first of all, what I want to do is I want to go to lighting only, and now we can see what we're getting here. We have a little bit of more control to just check all the stuff, and we definitely have quite a few issues with the house here. So if we just click the house, we go back to our details and we open the house. That's it. And now we're going to enable the UVs, and now we're going to look at channel 1 because that is most likely the channel for the light maps, and it looks very bad. This is also basically the worst light map that you could ever get. If you look at this house, like this face here, the whole front face, it needs to be unwrapped in one connected face. And then same goes for this, and you want to have as much connected pieces as possible, because right now it looks to me like each of these details of the wooden planks is basically its own UV shell. That is extremely ineffective. And you basically, you can't get a proper lighting bake like that. So the first thing that I'm going to try is I'm going to have a look here at those settings. So I guess these are auto-generated UVs. Like for an object like this, I would really recommend build custom UVs because it's so quick. You just select these faces, planar map, you select these faces, planar map, you select those, planar map. So this is actually super, super easy to build properly. Um, and we have a light map resolution of 1024, so that is already very, very high. Let's check the roof, because we don't get so many issues here. We do get them here, as you can see. So there are quite a few light map issues on these insides. So let's just agree that we only look at the house from this angle. No, so let's look at the roof and check the light maps here. Oh. Okay. Well, at least static mesh settings is telling me light map resolution 64. I'm just gonna make 512 now because there is like right now I can't fix these UVs. Like I won't export the mesh and fix the UVs. So the only thing that I can do now is up the resolution. Tack. And now it's like again. Okay, so it's invalidated now. That's fine. If we check those trees here, you can see like if I click the trees, they are all set to movable, right? So that means they will not get baked. So that bounce that they are getting, it actually comes from the dynamic skylight right now. Which is also the reason that if we go back to lit mode, they don't really look nicely shadowed. And the spruce actually also doesn't look good because the spruce has overlapping UVs as well. So if we look at UV channel 1, that's how it looks. I hope you can see the dots here, you can see it better on this background, but this is not very good. Let's check here. Coordinate index. I'm gonna set this to 128 now. The thing is, it won't really help us, I think. But well, we need to see. So first thing I'm gonna do is I really try to fix all these trees. Are they all the same one? Spruce 2020, 2020. So this is the maple, and we're gonna use 128 as well. The UVs look like this, channel 1 looks like this, and light map coordinate index is set to 0. We set this to 1. So we can just make sure that it's using this. This actually doesn't look too bad, so this could potentially yield, let's say, usable results. Big birch, the same one. So 128, let's look at this. That looks also a lot better. Birch small, birch small. Okay, that looks also fairly okay. Colored index 1. Did I already do this one? I think I did, right? No? 128. So the thing is with Lightmass, you have to be somewhat prepared. Like, you can't just use content that is not built with using Lightmass in mind and then think it works. That is totally not the case. So you need a little bit of prep work to get those things to work. Also gonna look at this guy here quickly. So UV channel 1. Yeah. Okay. If that should be alright. I mean, if we look at this guy again here, lighting only. I mean, this looks kind of okay. Yeah. Okay. So before we do the next bake, we will look at our sunlight again, because, whoops, there's something very, very important when we work with Lightmass and with our sunlight. Um, it's gone now, but let me quickly do this. So now you can see we get the preview shadow, and that means that like some content here has changed or the light direction has changed. So this preview shadow is actually the same shadow that we get when we switch the light to movable. If we scroll down, we can see cascaded shadow maps. So this preview that we're seeing here right now is actually a cascaded shadow map. However, the distance here is set to 0. Um, so what this means is, let me try to explain it like this. Normally, when you bake the lighting, all the shadows, they get baked into a static shadow as well. So if we would have some vertex animation on this foliage here, and on the trees and on the grass, you would not get moving shadows from that foliage because all the shadows are baked statically. If you have the movable light, then you get cascaded shadow maps, which are real-time shadows, and then you would see the animation. And what's super awesome about Unreal is that Unreal can blend dynamic shadows and static lighting. And this is this setting here. Those are the dynamic shadows for the stationary light. Right now they're set to 0. So what happens is if I bake it, as I said, all the shadows will become static. However, if I set this to 5000, you see now these settings unlock as well. What happens is it will render fully dynamic shadows 5000 units away from the camera, and then it will fade the dynamic shadows into the baked ones. You will still have the baked GI everywhere, but only the shadows, they will be dynamic for 5000 units. That means you can have baked lighting, baked shadows, but if you are, for example, here and that tree would move, you would get a moving shadow and it would fade over distance. And this is super, super important to know because it will help you building better and more interactive scenes where you like you really, for gameplay stuff, you want those dynamic shadows to be on for at least 3 or 5000 or 8000 units. This, however, has no effect on players. So if a player walks like in the back there where the maple trees are, he is outside of that 5000 unit range. He will still cast a dynamic shadow from the sun. That's something Unreal takes care of. So this is really for environmental objects and things like that. So I'm gonna activate this now. Just gonna save everything. And then we're gonna do another preview build quickly. Yeah. Yes, 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 yes. So, um, let's see how far we will continue after we have this bake, because I think we're close to this hour, so I will try to wrap this session up fairly quickly. And yeah, so we can talk about more stuff in detail with the next session that I will hopefully have the chance to record on like Sunday or something like that. Um, but yeah, I think it makes sense that we slowly start wrapping this up and come to an end, so it doesn't get too long. We also, like, as soon as we have this figured out that stuff bakes nicely, we also need to look at the exposure. Um, oh, well, I just noticed that I forgot to set the trees to static, so we need to do this and bake again. I'm an idiot. Damn it. Yeah. Um, because what I wanted to say while it was baking, for vegetation, it's very, very tricky working with Lightmass. So if you have a stylized scene that is fairly low poly, you can bake all the trees like, you know, like a charm. It's not a problem at all. It works super nicely. But the more dense it gets, the more creative you need to be to actually make it kind of work. So what I wanted to say before is, like, now all this foliage is set to dynamic, and you notice how it's lacking some shadowing. So what you can do is you can take this tree in 3D Studio Max or in Maya or whatever tool you're using, and you can add a skylight, and what you can do then is you bake ambient occlusion into the vertex colors of that tree. And then you use the baked ambient occlusion on the dynamic tree asset to shadow it inside here. So you basically, you hook it up in the material and you take the vertex color where you baked it into, and then you just multiply it by the base color, or you put it into the AO slot of the material, stuff like that. So you can basically fake the shadowing. And this is what I meant before when I was saying that you know, depending on the like how you want to use your assets, like you need to kind of make sure that if you want to use them for static lighting, you should probably build them in a different way. So you make sure that, like, you have, for example, uh, you can't bake them because they're too detailed. So what you need to do is you need to bake that AO in your 3D package. And those things, they are super important to think about them first. So right now I'm really just selecting all these, and I'm setting them to static. So they will actually get baked. It's also fairly easy. You can just right click select, and then you can say select matching classes, and then it selects just all the same trees, and then you can adjust them the way you want. So they're all set to static now, huh? Static, static, movable, this one. Select all matching classes, static. Alright. However, we could also see that we already got some improvements on the house here. So that is actually fairly sweet. So let's just do a quick bake again. I will do a medium bake, just for the sake of it. And okay, yeah, we forgot something else. This is actually super important. And that's the reason why maybe the dynamic trees also were not lit properly. What we definitely need to do is we need to add a Lightmass importance volume. And we can find this up here in the actor classes. We just type light, and then we get Lightmass importance volume. And it's nothing fancy, it's just this volume. And what this volume does is it does two things. Um, First of all, it defines an area for Lightmass where Lightmass basically knows like, hey, I can do some crazy detailed calculations in here. So it kind of like just gives Lightmass this area of like, you know what? Go in with all your rays, go in with all your full detail calculations, but please only in this area because the rest might be backdrop, for example, and you don't need this high detail. The second thing it does is it places indirect lighting samples. And those indirect lighting samples, they are basically like little dots floating around in space. And they have the indirect lighting information based on the bounces from, like over the terrain, they will be green. If there's a sample above this one here, the dirt material, it will be brown. And when characters move around, they are not baked, but they need to know what is the bounce light color that is supposed to brighten the shadows of the character basically. And those colors, they are saved into these little samples that will float around like everywhere here. And also these dynamic trees, if we set them to movable, they will be lit using those samples. And without the Lightmass importance volume, we actually don't have those samples. So this is super important to add this. I'm gonna save everything. And now we're gonna do the rebake. And I can also show you there's a mode to visualize those samples after the bake. So yeah, let's see what we get from this. Um, so yeah, just waiting for the bake. And yeah, maybe I will actually rotate the sun again. Maybe I'm not happy with this. I'm just like trying to see what I kind of like. I like these rim lights here, for example, on the trees. But again, we need to see what we get from this stuff here. We can also see that like this tree here, for example, there's these two trees, right? And the right one looks actually like it has been baked before, and the left one doesn't. So you can see how we get some nice core shadowing on that tree. And actually, if we look at those, like this looks really, really nice here actually. Like look at this, how natural this actually looks. And remember, this is with the tweaked diffuse values. So this looks like super, super nice. Those values, they look correct to me. And that's fairly interesting because they actually looked really, really bad when we just looked at the texture. But now you can see how it's actually coming together with the lighting and everything else. So it's definitely the right way of taking care of your colors like that. And yeah, so we also need to see what we can do with the foliage here because I can't bake ambient occlusion on those trees now. So I will just see how it works with Lightmass now that I increase the resolution and so on those trees. But maybe it doesn't work. I don't know yet. If it doesn't work, we need to make the trees dynamic, and then we will most likely have a problem with the shadowing. But we'll see. I mean, potentially you could also try to vertex paint it in Unreal and then save it into the asset. But yeah, that's quite a hacky workflow. I would not recommend doing that. It could potentially be a hot fix for the situation we're in right now, but yeah, it might also not work so well. Um, yeah, I just like here are a couple of decals, and there's also something that we might need to set up for the decals as well so that they work with static lighting. So this is the thing in Unreal. It's like the whole engine is very, very modular, and depending on what type of lighting you're using or what type of game you're building or what type of scene you're building, it can change drastically what types of features you want to use or how you want to do things. So for example, these decals here, They are deferred decals. And the thing is that the way Unreal takes the Lightmass data, um, these decals, when they get applied in the deferred pass, they don't know about the indirect lighting information that comes from Lightmass. And so what happens is if you just put regular deferred decals into a shadowed area, they will look super weird and wrong. And what you need to do is you actually need to activate the early CPass in the project settings and the debuffer. And the debuffer is basically a specific buffer for decals where they render into and where they can fetch the data from Lightmass, and then they can be applied back to the screen, and then they actually get the correct information. That's pretty funny because like when I started working with Unreal, we also worked with static lighting and with deferred decals, but there was no debuffer decals at that point. So what happened is we made a demo for our bosses, and as you might know, I was working on Dead Island 2, so we had, of course, tons of blood splatters and things like that when you like slash and hack the zombies. And what was happening was all these blood splatters and things like that, or like also cosmetic blood splatters. Oh god, that's a nice word. Cosmetic blood splatters in the map itself, in the environment, they looked like aluminum foil, like the red color of the blood was not visible inside the indirect lighting. And we, like, our bosses, they were not really happy about this. And they were like, hey, why does this look so broken? And we like, oh, we don't know. It seems like they're not picking up the lighting. And then we actually talked to Epic and they explained the issue to us. And then it, like, a year later or something, it actually got fixed with those debuffer decals. So this is just different rules apply for different things. So hey, look, if we look at this, now we can actually see it works fairly well. I mean, we do get quite some nice shadowing and stuff like that. I also see now that I forgot these trees, so they're still set to movable. Up, and we also set them to static, and this will only work the next time. And our grass looks very bad. And that might actually be because it doesn't have proper light maps, or maybe we actually need to use something else on the grass. Overall, you can see it looks much cleaner now. So if we go to lighting only and we go into the post volume and just crank up the exposure a little bit. Here, can you see that nicely? So this is like, it's already, the bake is a lot cleaner than it was before. Okay, so this is fairly nice. We're getting there. And as you can also see here, those shadows, those are the cascaded shadow maps. Those are fully dynamic shadows. And to illustrate that effect a little bit further, you can see this is the shadow map that is dynamic. And now it samples those planes from the tree. So if I would go into lit mode, you can see how it changes to the actual detailed tree. You can also see how it's crisp here and blurry here, and that is the transition of the shadow cascades. And the further I move out, at some point we will go past those 5,000 units, and then the shadows that this shadow here, that's the baked shadow. So this is like the fully static shadow that will not move. Same goes for this cube here. So this is the baked shadow, and if we move in, zoop, it becomes softer, and that's the dynamic shadow. So they blend seamlessly, which is very nice. So now you can see how the look of the image, look at this, how much more alive this looks, how much more real this looks, just because I unlocked the exposure. Can you see how much nice values we start to get in this picture? See the bounce lighting we get from here onto the robot. So this is actually a good point for stopping if you have something nice like this. So yeah, as you can see, so this is the foundation we laid out today for our daylight scene. And I think we were already able to improve it quite a lot. I mean, there's still tweaks that we can do and things that we can like try to get them to pop more, but this shot really starts looking nice, I would say, especially with the nice highlights on the roof here. So this is really going somewhere. And look how we can see the barrel. Like, imagine how that would just be pitch black if I would have left it with the old texture settings. So this is really important. And again, if you think like, oh, but now it lacks contrast, that's absolutely no problem, because we can just go in here and, you know, just like crank that stuff up. Now look at this, we already got like a nice hue shift here. So see, we already can crank up the contrast more. But now you can see how the barrel becomes also more black. So if it was black to begin with, in the end we wouldn't even see the dirt splotches on the barrel anymore. And that's the reason why it's so incredibly important to have proper values to work with. But again, so this I think this wraps it up for today's session. And yeah, I hope you guys learned something. I will try to continue with this on the weekend, but please don't be angry with me if I can't make it. But yeah, the goal is to release a video once a week in the future. So yeah, I hope you liked it. This wraps it up for today, and thanks for watching.